The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown is about the University of Washington men's 8-oared crew and their trip to Berlin for the 1936 Olympics. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year. It's sold over 2 million copies, translated into 15 languages, and rewritten for young readers. There's a PBS documentary, The Boys of 36, coming out this August. I'm John Bigelow of Concord. I learned to row on Lake Washington and then at Yale and raced the single in the 1984 Olympics. I was moved by this story and I contacted the author and have connected with some of the families. I speak on their behalf to share more about this story. In 2004, Joe Rantz had to sell his house. He moved in with his daughter Judy, and his granddaughter Jennifer went through his attic and collected rowing memorabilia and made a scrapbook. In 2006, Daniel James Brown moved next door to Judy Rantz. He wrote his first book called Under a Flaming Sky. Later that year, a high school teacher from Indiana sent Joe a request for some personal comments on being in Berlin in 1936. Judy wrote a 9-page synopsis and sent it to the teacher. She asked Daniel James Brown for comments. Dan liked it very much and encouraged her to write a book. If she didn't want to write a book, he would be happy to make it his next book. Judy read Under a Flaming Sky, and then she read it to Joe, who liked it. Joe thought he knew one of the main characters of the book, Angus Hay, from high school, and that his mom ran the Squim Gazette. But Angus Hay was a grown man in 1894. Dan reported that Angus Hay had moved from Hinckley, Minnesota to the Olympic Peninsula and had a son, Angus Hay Jr. Joe wanted to talk to Dan, and Dan wanted to talk to Joe. In December 2006, Joe had a major heart attack and went into hospice care. So Daniel didn't meet him until the spring of 2007. Joe died in September. Dan wrote a book about Joe, but mostly about the boat. During World War I, in 1918, the United States Navy built a large seaplane hangar on Lake Washington next to the Husky Stadium. In 1920, it was granted to the University of Washington and became the Shell House. The coach at that time was Al Ulbrichtson, and he helped set up a boat shop in the new Shell House for George Pocock from England. He was working at Boeing. In 1922, he quit Boeing and came over to build racing shells full-time. In 1934, Joe Rantz made a very fast freshman boat. In 1935, the varsity boat was all sophomores. It included 3 of the 36 Olympic team, number 7, Roger Morris, Joe Rantz was at 3, and Shorty Hunt at 2. The summer of '35, Joe worked at the Grand Coulee Dam as a jackhammer man. And then the crews came back in the fall of '35. The 9 boys who made this boat all came from Western Washington. None had rowed before college. The bow was Roger Morris. His family owned a moving business. Roger earned his tuition money playing in a dance band. 2-seat was Chuck Day. His father was a dentist. He was the best-dressed man in the boat. His older brother rowed varsity, and in the summer of '35, he also took a job on the Grand Coulee Dam. Number 3 was Gordy Adam. He grew up on a dairy farm. He went salmon fishing in Alaska for money to start at the university. He quit the football team and tried out for crew. 4 was Johnny White. After high school, he did 2 years of heavy labor on the docks and at the lumberyard for tuition money. 5 was Jim Stubb McMillan. He took whatever odd jobs he could to make money. Mowed lawns, raked leaves, weeded gardens, ran a paper route. He often saw the crews rowing on the lake, so when he joined the University of Washington, he turned out. 6 was Shorty Hunt. He was the youngest boy on the team and celebrated his 19th birthday on the day of the opening ceremonies at the Olympics. Number 7 was Joe Rantz. The year after high school, he spent working in Squim to earn money for college. Also, his fiancée Joyce Simdars was finishing up her senior year there. He played in a 3-man jazz band at local dances. The stroke was Don Hume. His father lost his job at the lumber mill, and the family had to move from Bellingham to Olympia. Don stayed with family friends to finish high school. After graduation, he worked for a year at the pulp mills, but when he lost his job there, he took a rowboat that he found and refurbished it, and rowed it roughly 100 miles to his family in Olympia, a 6-day trip. The coxswain was Bobby Mock, the only senior in the boat. His father was the town jeweler and watchmaker. Small and asthmatic as a kid, he topped out at 5 foot 7 inches, and in high school he lettered in basketball. His father never revealed his Jewish heritage to him until a few days before he left for Germany. There were 5 juniors and 3 sophomores in the boat. They were 19 to 22 years old, averaged 6 foot 3 and 177 pounds. This would be small for today's college crews, let alone a national team. Johnny White wrote a diary, and on June 10th, 1936, his entry read, "Left Seattle today for second trip to Poughkeepsie and Olympic trials at Lake Carnegie. At this time, have $14 in cash." June 17th, we had our 4-mile time trial today. The time was slow, 19:25. The water was very rough. We rowed the first 3 miles with the JV and the last 2 with the Frosh. We beat them both by about 2 lengths. June 22nd, race today, and we won by 1 1/4 lengths. Cal second, Navy third. We were last at the start and rowed 28 for 3 miles. At the 2.5 mile mark, we were 4 lengths behind, and at the 3 mile mark, we were still 2 lengths behind. In the last mile, we raised the stroke and rode the last 2 minutes at 39 or 40. Sunday, July 5th, 1936, Olympic Trials, Princeton, New Jersey. We got out to a bum start. When we settled down, we were a 1/2 length behind Penn and about even with Cal and New York Athletic Club. At the 1/2 mile, we were ahead of Cal and New York Athletic Club and still behind Penn. About 400 meters to go, we sprinted past Penn and won by 1 1/4 lengths, with Cal about 2 lengths behind. Time was a new record of 6:04, flat water. They received their trophy on the Princeton dock, and they received medals for being the National Association of Amateur Oarsmen champions. So to summarize their racing in the United States, Washington had made its first ever sweep of the IRA Regatta in Poughkeepsie, New York, and won the Olympic trials in Princeton, New Jersey. The shell was readied for transport from Traverse Island, New York, to the docks. Diary entry on July 13th. We loaded the shell on the Manhattan this morning and had an awful time with it. July 14th. Went to the top of the Woolworth building. Went to show and saw Duke Ellington. July 15th. Got underway for Germany, met Jesse Owens, Metcalf, Eleanor Holmes, Mary Lou Petty, Olive McKean, Catherine Rawls, Ken Carpenter, Ted and Bob Iverson. All these great athletes are just the same as you and I. July 24th, Hamburg, Germany. Unloaded the Husky Clipper from the SS Manhattan. We left for Berlin, where we had an enormous reception. There were thousands upon thousands of people out to see us. The U.S. Olympic team wore white straw hats. July 25th. Went to the course today at Grunau, and it was the best laid-out course I've ever seen. Joe had some newspaper clippings in the original German, and one of the translations is, "As you can tell from this picture, our guests are in a good mood, a prerequisite for winning. Even the American rowers at Grunau are feeling like joking around. 2 people from the 8-man rowing team dressed up as Indians." The rowing course on the Langersee at Grunau had floating bandstands on the starboard side and on the port side. Bobby Mock made an audio recording and remembered the race course years later.
On the left-hand side, about 500 meters from the finish, is a promontory that protects lanes 1 and 2. The wind comes from that promontory over to lane 6 in a diagonal headwind, so that lanes 1 and 2 have a big advantage for the first 1,500 meters. As we started the race, the first 200 meters went pretty good, but after that, we were so far behind even in that short distance, and the other crews were rowing much higher. We were rowing our customary cadence, But we continued to go behind, and I started to get Don to take the stroke up. Don is a stroke oar. He didn't hear me. He'd been sick for about 3 days. At the halfway mark, we were about a length and a half behind, which is a long ways in that boat race. Until about 800 or 700 meters from the finish, all of a sudden his eyes flew open, his jaw clamped shut, and away we went. We finally finished about 10 feet ahead of Germany and Italy. Well, crew has been a great influence on my life. It's one of the two greatest influences outside of my family that dictated what I did and how I did it. This group of men with whom I was associated, we were just like brothers. I was very close to those men. We were all liked each other and got along well, and we liked to be with each other. And that lasted out throughout almost all of our years. There are 4 of us left, 5 are gone, and I miss them.
Hitler and his entourage viewed the races from a balcony on what was called House West. And then came the finals. Leni Riefenstahl was Hitler's lead propagandist. She made a movie both during the race and the following day. August 14th. We took an awful beating by the lanes because, according to all the people around here, our lane was 2 lengths slower than lane 1. Germany and Italy didn't deserve to get their places, but were lucky on the draw. Al and George Pocock didn't think we had a chance to win on account of our slow lane. Everybody had given us up for loss, but by some means we were able to come through and win. The course had a stiff headwind and was a little choppy at the start. We got off to a lousy start as usual. The trouble was because we couldn't hear the starter. We were going fine, and at the 1,000-meter mark, we were only 5th, about a foot ahead of Great Britain. At the 1,500-meter mark, we were a length behind Italy and Germany, who were going well. We started to sprint there, and we just barely won. Reports vary from 3 to 8 feet. August 15th, had a very good breakfast, and then went to the shell house and had moving pictures taken. The fellows sat in the boat and took pictures of us while we were rowing. August 15th, went to the stadium and saw the final soccer game. After the game was over, we were crowned with the laurel wreaths and were given our gold medals. This is really an honor. They lined us up and then played the Star-Spangled Banner, and everybody saluted. Joe Rantz, Shorty Hunt, and Roger Morris were never defeated in their 4-year rowing career. Bobby Mock became a coach after graduation. The crew got together for reunions and were inducted into the Rowing Hall of Fame, and over the years their numbers began to diminish. In 2004, the last 3 surviving members of the crew got together for one final time. The Husky Clipper still hangs in the Conybeare Boathouse, and Joe's granddaughter, Jennifer Huffman, has taken up sculling and races in the Head of the Charles Masters Single. George Pocock was a mentor for this crew, and I was fortunate to meet him before he died. He appears in a short movie called Rowing, A Symphony of Motion, which can be found on YouTube and expresses his views of the sport. It's a great art, is rowing. It's the finest art there is. It's a symphony of motion. And when you're rowing well, it's nearing perfection. And when you reach perfection, you're touching the divine. It touches the you of yous, which is your soul. I'm John Bigelow of Concord, and I encourage you to read this great book.